Welcome to the Heartbeat of Mother Earth Summit. I'm your host, Jocelyn Mercado, and I am very, very happy to have today with us Dr. Jennifer Gordon. Welcome, Jenny, to the summit.
Thank you, Jocelyn.
Dr. Jennifer Gordon is a Jungian analyst, licensed psychologist, and educator. She holds degrees from the C.G. Jung Institute of Zurich, the University of Kansas, UC Berkeley, and Stanford University. For the past 21 years, Dr. Gordon supplements her clinical practice by providing seminars on interpreting fairy tales and myths. She has also led dream group retreats in Oregon, Texas, and Switzerland. In response to our growing environmental crisis, Dr. Gordon convened fairy tale and dream groups to listen for psyche's wisdom and voice. Her most recent public lecture, titled Climate Change, Analytical Psychology, and What the World Hangs On, presents this material. In this upcoming interview, she will be sharing with us what she learned. And so our topic for today is listening to the heartbeat of Mother Earth through dreams and fairy tales. And I'm so excited to get into this topic with you. So Jenny, could you share with us, first of all, how did you become interested in dreams and fairy tales?
Well, I grew up hearing bedtime stories from my father, who was a physician and surgeon, and he made up stories to us about Mix Up the Mole. Mix Up the Mole had friends, Sally the Squirrel, Freddie the Fox, and Sammy the Snake. And I was captivated by these stories. And I think psychology in graduate school was made a lot more approachable when I thought about studying fairy tales. It's much more accessible than theories per se, and so that was an attraction. And then dreams, what's pretty exciting is when we look at dreams, we can see the same motifs as there are in fairy tales, and that was exciting to me. And also, dreams are like portals to another dimension. And when I was an early teen, I was very interested in the spirit world, and I thought, well, this is a way to access that.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So then can you tell us how did it come about that you started looking to dreams and fairy tales in response to our climate crisis?
Well, on Earth Day in 2014, at the University of Oregon, here in my hometown of Eugene, I got to hear a philosopher and nature writer, Kathleen Dean Moore. And at the time, she just published this book called Moral Ground, Ethical Action for a Planet in Peril. And she likened the effects of climate change to that of a river that's running its course and cannot be held back. But its direction can change if we get in there and we throw stones and logs into the water and redirect its course to mitigate the damage. And that lecture changed my life. I knew I had to get involved. And she cited research from a project from the Yale Project on Climate Communication. And they conducted a study to ask people who already were acknowledging climate change what they felt about it. And the feelings that came up for most people were they were feeling afraid and sad and scared and helpless. And the takeaway, though, that grabbed me was that Kathleen said we have to maintain hope against our tendency to want to give in and give up. It's our ethical standpoint, the ethical standpoint to take is hope. And I remember walking home after this, just shaking my head thinking to myself, on the one hand, I wanted to deny climate change. I didn't want to have to change my life. And I wanted to repress my own fear and my own sadness. And on the other hand, I knew that I was creating the problem. I was part of it by using my car, by wanting to fly an airplane, by heating my own house, by my own complacency. I was contributing to the problem. So I knew it was time to sacrifice some of these privileges and step up. And it dawned on me walking home that as a psychologist and trained in Jungian psychology, what would Carl Jung and his psychology contribute to the conversation. And I remember his quote, "What the world hangs on is a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man." And I felt like, indeed, we're here now. It's happening. So these feelings of shock and helplessness and anger and sense of urgency that we feel today, I have in my own practice, people come to me with these same feelings. And it's clear today that our cultural norms and values are at odds with nature. And there's an imbalance. And that is often what causes these feelings that rise up that people come to see me for. And so when I hear these strong emotions in my practice, I ask myself 3 questions. I ask myself, is there an image or a story that holds these emotions that can tell us more about kind of the larger story? Is there a dream that might come to our aid? And is this event a catalyst for growth and transformation of any kind so that it can begin to have some meaning and not be aimless? So in order to answer these questions, I decided to convene the fairy tale group and the dream group and see what Psyche might give us by way of an answer and guidance.
Yeah. Wow. Wonderful. So, so can you tell us then a little more about how are fairy tales useful in times like these?
Yeah. Well, fairy tales hold our emotions. Stories do. And we project into them, like Cinderella or Jack and the Beanstalk. We project into them our own stories and our own experiences. We can identify with the hero or the heroine, with the dilemmas they're facing, the impossible tasks. Sometimes we feel like we're under a spell, or we've lost a parent, as in the beginning of Cinderella, or we have to go out into the world and find our way, as in the Goose Girl. And so they act as a container. And then we can begin to relate to those emotions a little differently and not be as overwhelmed by them. And we can begin to reflect on our lives as stories and be less reactive. So fairy tales teach us attitudes or responses to similar situations that we find ourselves in. And I'd like to share, just by way of an example, the story of the Frog King. And I especially like this one with women who are learning to assert themselves, because it starts with a woman or a girl actually, a princess, and she's playing with her ball by the side of a pond, and it falls into the pool of water, and she wants it. And there's this frog nearby, and she says, "Would you go down and get it?" And he says, "Sure, I'll go do that, but on 2 conditions. I get to eat the food off your plate and sleep in your bed." Mm-hmm. And she says, "Well, sure, okay." And he gets the ball, and she goes along her merry way and plays with it. And come dinner time, sitting at the table with her father, the king, they hear this slop, slop, slop at the door. And the king says, what's going on? And she says, "Well, he helped me get my ball. And so I agreed that he could eat the food off my plate and sleep in my bed." And the king said, "Well, then you have to do what you promised." And he eats the food off of her plate, but when it comes time to sleep in her bed, she says, "No way," and picks him up and throws him on the wall. And he turns into a prince. You see, he was under a curse the whole time. And it took someone like her to get angry enough and to say no. And in that way, psychologically, a woman redeems her positive masculine, her assertiveness, by trusting her intuition and her feelings and not doing what she should do. So this is just an example and a helpful use of fairy tales for us, in that they show us how we can respond in similar situations.
And I think sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I wanted to say really quickly, I think it's kind of reassuring because these tales are so ancient, and it lets us know that for hundreds or even thousands of years, people have been going through these kinds of situations, and how have we dealt with it, and how have other people responded to the same kind of thing in the past? It's like a reassurance.
Yeah. And they are the stories of our ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredibly rich pool of wisdom that we can glean from these stories when we begin to open them up and apply them to our everyday lives. Also, fairy tales were an oral tradition, and it's important to remember that they were for adults, not children. Mm-hmm. They were told by adults for adults. They speak to, in the initial situation, they show us what's missing in outer conscious life. They speak to these collective problems and to what we need to hear that's missing. So when we open up a fairy tale from a Jungian perspective, we're also looking at what's out of balance. And we talk about it in terms of masculine or feminine energies. And by masculine, in very simple terms, the masculine principle has to do with taking action and whether we feel like we can or we can't. Mm-hmm. And the feminine principle has to do with whether we have a right to be or not. And when we do feel we have a right to be in the world and to bring our voices to the table, we feel a sense of positive value and self-worth. And when we don't feel like we have that right, we feel shame. So we're looking at this balance, and oftentimes it's the masculine that's missing in need and development, or it's the feminine that's missing in need of integration. So that's the language we bring to understanding fairy tales.
Very interesting. So could you share with us, what was the fairy tale that you chose to study in your group, and what came from that?
Sure. I chose the fairy tale Hansel and Gretel because it's very familiar to us. But I used the Brothers Grimm's version, which might be less familiar to people. And I'd like to just read the very beginning of the tale. There are two parts of the tale I'm going to open up here with you that I think that prompted me to want to meet with you. Mm-hmm. The initial situation and what I'm calling the Gretel moment, when she pushes the witch into the oven.
Okay.
So the opening of the tale reads like this. A poor woodcutter lived with his wife and his 2 children on the edge of a large forest. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. The woodcutter did not have much food around the house, and when a great famine devastated the entire country, he could no longer provide his family with food. One night, his wife asked him, "What's to become of us?" And they had no idea what to do. But the wife came up with the idea of sending the children into the forest so at least the woodcutter and his wife, would not die of starvation. And that's the very beginning of the tale. Okay. So when we approach this material symbolically, we consider the nature of the image itself, and then we take all of that as metaphor for an inner psychological situation or what's going on in the world. And so the first symbol here is that of the famine. And it's a scarcity of food brought about by drought. Without food, without water, food can't grow, jobs are lost, poverty grows, and people die. And we really don't have to look very far to see this in the world now. In fact, I can even look in my own backyard here in Oregon. And last summer was our hottest summer. We didn't have enough water. Food crops were smaller. And even sadly in my own school district here, 43% of our kids qualify for lunch subsidies. They experience food insecurity. And it's just like the poor woodcutter who can't feed his family. So this is a real concrete thing. And we can amplify that image by thinking of like the Mother Earth goddess Demeter, who was enraged with grief when her daughter Persephone was abducted by Hades and brought into the underworld. She was so angry that she had everything die on the planet. in this initial situation of the fairy tale, we see a poor relationship between the masculine and the feminine. He's ineffectual, and she's reacting to that poor relationship. She is death doling, in fact. She doesn't allow for regeneration at all. And this is an image of the archetypal feminine, the sacred feminine. She's two-sided. She creates and she destroys. And it's not necessarily a bad thing that the destruction happens. I think we want to see that, in fact, with some of the pillars that are holding up our society that need to break down for new things to grow. It's nothing to really be afraid of. But in this initial situation, we see what's missing in collective consciousness, and we know that we need to restore that regenerative feeling of life again. And the whole tale is about that. And when we look at today's world, we know that we are under the spell of devouring energies. And they're not just out there, they're also in ourselves. And I'll get to that when we get to the witch. But how do we know that we're under the spell of devouring energies? I think we can look at the tar sands in Alberta, Canada, and the lungs of Mother Earth that are being ripped up for the fossil fuels that are underneath her. And how we condone in an industrial growth society in which we're hyper consumer oriented. We can order things off our computers and expect them to be at our door the next day. And we have this kind of insatiable appetite that we indulge. And that's what we're up against. And I think it helps to know that we are complicit in making the problem so that we can feel empowered to do something about it. So the symbolism of the children, and Gretel in particular, into the child, we project hope. They're our future potential. And they're bringing the new consciousness that we need. And so we track her as our heroine and see what she does. And the psyche now in the story leads us into the forest. And so what is this forest? And it's a great symbol of the creative unconscious itself. It holds all these potentials for good and for bad. And it's an unknown, hidden place. And it holds for us psychologically all that's repressed, our repressed emotions, and all the unlived life, which might be the jewels. In fact, that's where we need to go, and that's why I'm excited about dreams, and was curious to see in the dream group if maybe we would see something that would help us direct our lives, into the future. So Gretel and Hansel meet the witch in the forest. She caused the famine, and now they're right up against her, this death doling side, the ones, the witch that wants to devour them, basically, eat them up. And she's hungry, and she seduces them with sugar, and I take pleasure in that, because I think how many of us are trying to stop that habit of eating a lot of sugar? We have a lot of diabetes going on these days too, and the witch is alive and lives among us. And we come to this point in the tale of the greatest tension, and like we are today, we're at a turning point. And so I like to call this our shared Gretel moment. And I'm going to read again this part of the tale just to get a feeling of the scene. The witch pushes poor Gretel out to the oven where the flames were leaping from the fire. "Crawl inside," said the witch, "and see if it's properly heated so we can slide the bread in." The witch intended to close the oven door once Gretel had climbed inside, for the witch wanted to bake her and eat her too. But Gretel sensed that what she had in mind and said, "I don't know how to do it. Show me how." "You stupid goose," said the old woman. "The opening's large enough. Watch, even I can get in." She waddled up to the oven and stuck her head through the oven door. Then Gretel gave her a push that sent her flying inside and shut the iron door and bolted it. So who is this witch that lives in us and among us? She personifies nature in her life-denying capacities. She wants to extinguish consciousness itself and life itself. And Gretel personifies this new conscious attitude, a new narrative. So I like to think about, what is Gretel saying no to, and what is she saying yes to? I think when she pushes that witch into the oven in that split second of awareness that her life is at stake, she's saying no to whatever renders us psychologically now unconscious. Okay, she's showing us an attitude to take. She's not going to be blindly obedient. She's not going to be compliant. She's not going to obey an authority. She's retaining her autonomy and her own moral authority. She's saying no to greed. She's saying no to corporate interests that would like to come in and destroy our air and our water and our soil. She's saying no to addictions. She's saying no to fear. She's showing us courage. And so she's saying yes to her own life. And by the way, her brother over there in the corner is in a cage watching the whole scene. She doesn't want him to die. So she's saying yes to an ethic of care and to thinking about we instead of me. She's saying basically yes to life. And in this way, in her action, she's redeeming actually the positive masculine. We need to do that. And she's redeeming the positive feminine because she's saying yes to life. This Gretel moment, I hear in my practice and in the stories many times a week in different forms. So it's really an archetypal image. It's a motif that it lives through us. And I would like to share a dream of a client I had recently, with her permission, that she dreamt, she's a straight A student at the university, and that she's a straight A student in high school. But something hit her and she started to fail academically. Not in her beautiful talent of a voice that she has. This wasn't going away, but her performance in school was. She got these symptoms of anxiety and depression, and again, what's out of balance? And she dreams that she's in her bedroom and she's taking care of a snake. And the snake gets out of its cage and it starts to rise up and grow and grow and consume a lot of the room and then start to fall down on her chest. And she's there with her boyfriend who helps her get out from under that. And the dreamer decides she's not going to feed that snake anymore. She lets, by not feeding it, she lets it shrivel up and die. And that's how she takes care of it. This is a Gretel moment because of that. She takes charge and she says no. And she stops feeding the thing that's scaring her so badly, that's causing this anxiety and depression. And so we have to figure out how that looks in her daily life. But essentially, she's on the path to recovery.
Wow.
Now she's in charge of her emotions. They're not in charge of her. Mm-hmm. And that's a pivotal moment.
Yeah, so that's clearly a big dream, right?
That's a big dream, and that may be a dream for all of us. Exactly.
Yeah. Such clear and powerful symbolism in that dream.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little more about, what is meant by a big dream? How do we know if we have a big dream?
Sure. Well, a dream, like a big dream, comes through an individual, but it's really for the whole group. And it speaks to a collective problem. And again, if we're fortunate, it will show us what we're all missing in our collective consciousness, and that image comes to our service. It's the healing medicine in the dream for all of us. And it's usually a dream image that has a lot of emotion and even a numinous quality, some mystery to it. And it gives us a new value or principle to energize us and go forward with. And I have led dream retreats with my colleague Tess Castleman, who, and in December of 2014, we convened a dream group retreat here in Eugene. I wanted to have an urban retreat to see what our own collective psyche might add to this, our situation locally and globally. And I held this question. I didn't share with them that I wanted to see if we would get a dream to respond to the climate crisis, but I held that question, and I was really amazed by what came up.
Yeah. Are you able to share that with us?
Sure.
What was that came up there?
Yeah, well, when we start a dream group, we kind of synchronistically, randomly find the first dream, which usually sets the tone and the theme for the entire retreat. And this was no different. The first dream came from a woman who was 55 years old, approximately. And this was her dream. The dream took place in a monotone classroom at our local community college. And a small breakout group went to the back of the room where they found a doorway that entered into an outside area. And they were delighted and excited to find a small spring of water with stones and a green frog sitting on one. Back in the room was a man, one of the leaders, who had a baton like a conductor, pointing to the chalkboard saying, and this is my response, as if a question had just been asked beforehand. And the dreamer thought to herself, yeah, he was answering the question posed just before. And then a group was walking by the seminar and they saw this beautiful turquoise rug with a black kinds of designs in it. And they thought, that's just perfect, that's beautiful. So there are a lot of images in the dream, but the dreamer used this technique called active imagination, where you engage the image in the dream and start to dialogue with it. And the composite came to her of this green frog with the man with the baton into a green man. Now the green man is an archetypal image, but that image had a profound effect on everybody, and we all started dialoguing with the green man of our own, and we made a lot of that dream image for the rest of the retreat. It had that quality of numinosity, of an emotional charge, and an attraction to the soul that held a lot of mystery. And it held this power to bring us a new value that would guide us into the world. And so now I'd like to amplify that image of the green man a little bit. He's green, and we know that every spring we get this regenerative color through plant life. Brings up that vegetative principle of new life. But this is an image that's been around a long time, the green man. In fact, we see it in Iraq in the early 3 BC. We see it in the Egyptian god Osiris and the Islamic prophet Khadir. We see it preserved in church buildings in Venice and Scotland and Germany. You'll see the green man as a kind of vestige. And we'll even see it in Portland, Oregon. We have it carved into our buildings. But here's an image for the viewers of the green man. His eyes in the leaves. People have written about it. So it's exciting. It represents this regenerative principle of life and a masculine that's in service to the feminine. Like a good farmer, like Mr. Green Jeans. That dates me. But the burning question is, why now? What is this new value that we need? And I think it's pretty clear that our psyche gives us this symbol right now because our planet is seriously compromised and we need to renew our relationship with nature, to her beauty, to her divinity. And we need an image like this. When we get an image like this, we are connected to something that's invisible to the eye, that helps us begin to find our place in a much larger, vaster community and world and cosmos of oneness. it in fact is the archetype of oneness with the earth,
Mm.
the image of the green man.
Yeah.
So I think Psyche answered the call, answered the question.
That's for sure.
Really exciting. It's really exciting that these stories of our ancestors and these stories we hold deep inside and the spontaneous images that come up during times of great need, like we're in right now,
Mm-hmm.
very moving, they're available to help us and to guide our way. And that's my message. We have resources. We have resources.
Great. And through that, we have hope then.
And through that, we have hope. And the Gretel moment and the Green Man, these are stories, Psyche's stories, that we can engage and ways to help us move forward and figure out what attitudes and what energies we can harness.
Yeah, yeah, for positive movement forward. Yeah, thank you so much. This has been really wonderful learning about your studies and the dream group. Really, really wonderful. I wanted to ask you, do you have any new projects or new endeavors that you're working on that you would want to share with the audience?
I'm new to this technological world and media, and I'm very excited to see if there's interest in having a webinar, a fairy tale seminar online with the viewers or anyone who would like to do that. I've been leading fairy tale groups for 20 years, and I have a lot of curriculum, and I like to stimulate people's imaginations like this and open them and give them access to the wisdom inside the fairy tales. My thesis at the Jung Institute was on sisters and soul making, and I drew from a lot of fairy tales to look at how we and the feminine is expressed through story that we can apply to everyday life. And I'd like to offer a seminar on fairy tales having to deal with the feminine principle and stories about sisters in particular.
Yeah. Wonderful, wonderful. And by the time this interview airs, there may be a chance for people who are viewing to actually sign up for that webinar that you're talking about. So we'll make sure to have that information available by that time. Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing all of this. It's been really a pleasure talking with you and sharing with you today.
Thank you for letting me contribute my voice to the community. Really appreciate it.
Wonderful. Have a great day.
You too.